keep his train of thought moving without looking at notes, but I am not blessed that way. The past few weeks we've been talking in broad terms about peace, about war, and how we as Christians should, how do we react to war? What should we be feeling and thinking? We walked through just war theory, the 8 principles of just war theory, and as I sat and thought about those, in my own personal opinion and mind, looking at those principles, that would tell me that no war since World War II has been able to meet all of the criteria of just war. We've also talked about pacifism, and then something that's relatively new on the scene called just peacemaking, and the 10 principles of just peacemaking. We've been doing that in the context of the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. And in many traditions, the Sermon on the Mount can be viewed as a series of hard sayings or ideals that become almost like it's impossible to measure up to. As a consequence, many traditions, religious traditions, have avoided talking about the Sermon on the Mount or teaching about the Sermon on the Mount. And my own experience of it from way back was like it's hellfire and brimstone. And it's like, if I can't meet that, I'm going to go to hell. So that created a fear. And I just lost
How does he know that?
So anyway, I lost that one. And I think the dog agreed with me. But the Sermon on the Mount is a series of teachings that Jesus gave us on how to relate to people, and he also lived his life that serves as a model to us in our relationship with other people. We talked about not going to bed angry, that we should be going to our brother, and the goal is for reconciliation. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be bringing it down. Still today, we're going to be talking in some broad principles, but about violence in our society, especially in America. When you turn on the TV, it looks like a pretty scary world out there. And some are saying that it's creating a culture of fear that we're living in. We see school shootings, and they continue to go on at all levels of school. You go back to Columbine, which was a high school. You go to like NIU and other universities shootings, higher education. And even in Beloit, Michigan, there was a school shooting in a grade school, elementary school. You hear war and rumors of war and talking heads on TV, Iran, Israel, what's going to happen? You see on the news things about human rights abuses, genocide. You hear warnings about stranger danger. You hear warnings about medicines that you take.
Yeah.
We see bullying. We hear about that. We hear about the drug wars.
Right.
And is it any wonder that many of us just kind of retreat into our own cocoons of safety? Because we're comfortable there. Some of the questions that we're going to be looking at is how do we stop this vicious cycle? It's a cycle of violence. And what are the root causes? What are the solutions? And can any one person among us do anything about it? Kurt talked about the little cartoon with the people standing behind each other with a little bubble up there. What can one person do? Well, nothing can get done if we all walk around that way. Why is it important that we do something? Because the children are our future. Violence violence among children is especially prevalent, but they also see it in society around them, in their parents. And if we're going to stop this vicious cycle of violence, it's up to all of us. God, through his model of Jesus Christ, calls us to participate in building God's kingdom for his vision of what it's supposed to be like on earth. The Sermon on the Mount gives us practical advice to emerge from our cocoons of safety, to become butterflies of spreading his gospel of love in this world. It starts with us. If we take a look at the Matthew text, which is also printed in your handout, Matthew 7, 1 through 2, it says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Do we really want that in daily life? Is that what we're really looking for? Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And at first glance, that really is a hard teaching. Don't we have a tendency to judge? At work, home, with friends? And that's where I got a little ahead of myself on the hellfire and brimstone. But that was my experience of that passage. And for many others it becomes, I can't possibly meet that standard. It is what it is. And what can I possibly do to change it? In this Kingdom Ethics by, I can only pronounce the one author's last name, and that's Stassen. He examines a lot of the Sermon on the Mount in three parts. So the first part is what's called traditional righteousness, which is the first two verses. And in the context of Jesus' day, he was speaking out against the Pharisees and their ritual purity, because that was making other people outcasts. So he was speaking out against things that were oppressing other people. And in the Romans passage, it becomes a little bit clearer about what he's talking about judging. And it says, "You therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself." Because, well, I'll leave it at that. It's really talking about condemning other people for what they do, an example from my own life is I like driving stories, and I find myself, one of my pet peeves is people that don't signal. Because if they would signal, then I could get someplace quicker. So I get a little bit upset in the car. And then I find myself, maybe 2 minutes later, maybe 2 intersections later, I don't signal. And I go. So what this passage is saying is, in the traditional righteousness, is to treat other people the way we want to be treated ourselves. But it's hard because we get caught up in the vicious cycle, which is the next two verses, verses 3 and 4. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? How many times, I know I've experienced this, but how many times have you heard people talking about driving that they're not worried about how they drive, but they're worried about what the person is going to do. Or perhaps when we're having animated conversations with either a spouse or our children or a co-worker, isn't there a tendency to try and get in that last word? Instead of one of the things of just peacemaking, which Kurt mentioned last week, is unilaterally taking a step back. No matter what the other person does, we're in charge of what we can do. And we can take that step back. But that's part of that vicious cycle, and it's really hard to do. And then the transforming initiative is verse 5. Take the plank out of your own eye first, and then you will see clearly. That's where we start to get away from our condemning attitudes. It's really introspection, and introspection can be very hard. When we start trying to take an honest look at ourselves, that can be really difficult. The writer in this book says it begins with taking responsibility for our own biases in our way of seeing others, even violent others, in our social situation. Love God and love other people as we love ourselves. And another thing about it for me, I don't think that I will ever really arrive at a point where I have a completely loveless eye. It's a journey. It's a journey just like faith, where in Spirit of Hope we say faith is a journey and not a guilt trip. We're not perfect. We're shaped by many things in life, not only by what we have read, but all of the experiences that we've had to this point in our life. And it shapes sometimes our view of the truth, and something that challenges our view of the truth can be very difficult to accept at